Marzuqi with us today, but his brother sadly passed away, so he wouldn't be able to join us. But we at the Arab Organization for Human Rights send our deep condolences to Mr. Marzuqi. So in 2021, Tunisian President Kais Saied froze the parliament, dismissed the prime minister, and announced he will temporarily rule by decree. After closing the parliament with tanks, President Kais Saied has suspended the constitution and dissolved the Supreme Judicial Council, seizing almost total power since then in moves his opponents called a coup. The measures taken by Said allowed him to consolidate his power and authoritarian rule. Recently, President Said launched a new arrest campaign against prominent activists and media and political figures, some of whom were brought before military courts in a serious setback of the Tunisian revolution achievements. The crackdown on opposition and media represents a blow to the fragile democratic gains made in the aftermath of the Tunisian revolution. Alongside this crackdown on critics and opposition, the president also launched a racist campaign against migrants, representing them as an enemy and a threat to the state. Human rights groups have called his proclaimed anti-corruption campaign and the following crackdown on the opposition as a power grab, and they raised serious concerns about the increasingly authoritarian rule of President Kais Saied. In this regard, the webinar today will shed light on these grave violations of human rights and will discuss possible ways to protect the democratic path Tunisians struggle to achieve. So today we have a number of speakers who will tackle different aspects of the increasing human rights violations taking place in Tunisia following Said's seizure of power. I would like to thank all of our speakers in advance for their time to be with us today, and we are looking forward to hearing their comments and interventions. We will start with Dr. Elia Hatem, who's a French-Lebanese lawyer and politician. Dr. Eli, the floor is yours. You can start speaking now. And I just want to also mention that each speakers will have from 7 to 10 minutes for their interventions. So the floor is yours, Dr. Eli. Oh, sorry. It seems that Dr. Eli Hatem is still not with us. So we will start with Dr. Nabil Khouri. Dr. Khouri is a former American diplomat and a professor at a university in the US. Dr. Nabil, the floor is yours.
Your mic is closed.
Okay. Am I on?
Yes.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. It was very short notice, so I will share my some of the thoughts I and others have been having lately about Tunisia, and look forward to a discussion. President Said has now been in office for 4 years, and there has been a deterioration in the economy. The standard of living has deteriorated. Economic growth is in the negative numbers. Inflation is quite high. And in human rights, obviously, the deterioration is very marked, and there is concern in Washington, there is concern in the Biden administration over that. In political terms, both in domestic and foreign policies, there is nothing remarkable that has been achieved. In fact, quite the contrary. In that sense, in the foreign policy sense, the latest to come out of Tunisia is this sudden decision to send an ambassador to Damascus. And the timing of this is very interesting, and it raises legitimate questions as to who suggested this to the president of Tunisia, and in return for what exactly. Personally, I think Gulf countries have a lot to do with this, in particular Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, because of the rapprochement going on over there with the regime in Damascus. Now, for the US, this poses a dilemma. There has been a question in Washington as to the IMF proposed grant, or a grant that is being considered to help bail out the Tunisian economy. One side of the administration would like to use the IMF grant as leverage. In other words, wave it in front of the regime, in front of the president, and say, you can have this grant, but conditional on certain reforms. The other side to this is not to use this as leverage, because if the grant is denied, it would only hurt the Tunisian people and the Tunisian economy, and it would not have any noticeable effect, positive effect on the president of Tunisia. I link the two things because there is the possibility that behind the decision to send a Tunisian ambassador to Damascus is a promise of funds from the Gulf. And for the Biden administration, any money that might be promised or might be forthcoming from the US or from the IMF can be counteracted by money from the Gulf. And therefore, any pressure, any leverage hoped to be gained from denying or threatening to deny funds would end up with no impact whatsoever if the money can be made up elsewhere. It has been a dilemma for various administrations since the Arab uprising of 2011. The hesitation of how to assist and when to assist governments that were then in transition, and many of which have since regressed. The question for the Biden administration is one of course, we desire to see democracy thrive in Tunisia, but how exactly to do this? Can the government be enticed to change? Can reforms from above be assisted somehow? And frankly, in my opinion and the opinions of many others, this is a dead end. It seems like the presidency in Tunisia these days is not at all listening to good advice from many friends of Tunisia in the US and in Europe. The alternative and that has always been an option from 2011, is not to work with governments that resist change, but to work directly with the people, to work directly with civil society. The problem, of course, is that civil society in the Arab world, and in Tunisia in this case, is not always responsive, is afraid of repercussions at home if they deal with foreign governments, if they accept assistance, particularly from the US. And frankly, many civil society groups have lost hope in a relationship, in a constructive relationship with the United States. So it's a dilemma, and it recurs in several countries in the region. There is no one solution that fits all. To some extent, if we compare the situation with some other countries suffering from a great deal of corruption and a lack of responsiveness to good advice from governments, Lebanon, for example. One solution which I have suggested in an article about a year ago is an international development fund that pools resources from various countries wishing to help. And instead of giving the aid on a bilateral basis, putting it into projects directly into the economy and managed by a board of experts from outside the country. The point being that the economy needs help, the people need help. At this point, violence would probably only cause chaos and would delay any meaningful reforms. And so perhaps economic assistance would eventually lead to political progress. As I say, it's a dilemma. There is no guarantee that any of the suggested alternatives, options would work, would produce the positive results needed. Much is needed from Tunisia itself, ideas from civil society, from people who want to see democratic change in their country. Suggestions, particularly if those ideas could be pooled, if civil society in Tunisia could agree on a plan, on a particular strategy, and then invite foreign assistance based on that plan. In the end of the day, I think Tunisians know best what is good for their country. And solutions imposed one way or another from outside historically have proven not to help. But that's what I have to say for now, and I look forward to any discussion that follows.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nabil Khouri, for your important intervention and the points that you've raised, especially on the role of the civil society now in Tunisia and the political situation there. And now we will move to our next speaker, Dr. Eli Hatem, who's a French-Lebanese lawyer and politician. Dr. Eli, you can start now.
The mic's closed.
Of the situation, a lover, the Middle East, I would say first, second in the Arab world, and especially now in Tunisia. Of course, this situation makes me looking forward to tell you how is also the situation regarding the human rights in France compared to some other countries. And I think it is, I would say, funny to watch the other countries like Tunisia or like the other Arab countries and criticizing human rights there, while we have so many abuse in France now. I am at the court right now, and I am pleading in affair of an abuse of demonstrators in France. Unfortunately, this situation of violence occurs all over the world, including in the Arab world. And I think that what we have to seek for is to educate people first. Second, to solve all the internal problem in all those countries, including our Arab countries, Tunisia, the Middle East, Algeria, and other countries. And we need also to stop corruption. And those are the most important points. Just to tell you another funny story, it's the reaction of the Iranian government while watching the demonstrations and the way how the government is treating the demonstrators in France by saying that Iran is very much worried about the situation of the demonstrators and how the French government and French authorities are treating the demonstrators in Paris and all over France. At the same time, it was so funny to see more women with veils in Paris demonstrating more than Iran. So that's why we cannot just put one figure, one image of what's happening in the Arab world and to compare to the others. Of course, violation exists everywhere, including in France. We have to look forward for peace, for reconciliation, and to reconstruct our Arab world, which is used to be and still and need to be one of the strongest areas all over the world. We look at China looking at us, and we can see also some other countries. Our civilization, the Arab civilization, was one of the famous, and it is still used by the West, I mean by Europe. And this is my testimony regarding this situation. And this is my message also to my other friends, Arab friends, either in Tunisia or in some other Arab countries.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ili. And you're right; these violations are not exceptional to the Arab world. They are, they take place globally in every state almost. Thank you again for your intervention and for being with us here today.
Sorry for being so short, because I am at the court and I need to plead in a few minutes.
No, thank you so much for your time. Of course, we understand that you have other work to do, but thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for you.
Thank you. Now we will be moving to our next speaker, Dr. Siham Badi, who's a former Minister of Women's Affairs in Tunisia. Dr. Siham, please, the floor is yours.
Mic's closed.
Is Dr. Siham?
Okay. It's okay for now. Yes. Thank you for this invitation. I take this opportunity to say many things. I will try to be short. I hope that all countries cooperating with Tunisia should review their cooperation with this government to avoid contribution to the ongoing undermining of human rights and of the independence of the judiciary that Tunisians have worked hard to secure since the 2011 revolution. And I hope that in Europe, leaders, I think they should call on the Tunisian authorities to release all lawyers, politicians, journalists, and many others who have been arbitrarily detained now in Tunisia. Tunisian authorities must immediately stop their systematic interference in the judiciary and reverse all dishes that have undermined judicial independence, including by reintending those judges who were thoroughly detained and dismissed. the Tunisian authorities must stop trying civilians before military courts and ensure that the courts do not become a tool of repression in Tunisia. United Nations, for example, human rights call the Tunisian authorities to respect due process and fair trial standards in all judicial proceedings and to release immediately all those arbitrarily detained, as I said, including anyone detained in relation to the exercise of their rights to freedom of opinion, of expression. As you know, since July 2021, the authorities has also taken a series of measures that have undermined the independence of judiciary, including dissolving the High Judicial Council and the summary dismissal of 57 judges in Tunisia. UN too, for example, call on the authorities to work towards bringing justice sector legislation, procedures, and practice into line with applicable international norms and standards, and through the separation of powers to uphold the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. Sure, revolts across the regions, but it has not led to stability either economically or politically. But we cannot go back. We cannot accept what Kais Saied did. The return of democratic institution is very important. We must return to the initial constitution of 2014. We must engage a national dialogue because, as you say, the need of new electoral law that will establish an independent electoral body and revision of the electoral system to facilitate effective national policymaking, the establishment of policies that address critical issues such as corruption, security, sector reform, and public administration, the reestablishment of the balance of power among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, because, as you know, Kais Saied hold all the powers in this moment, and increased voter and civic education to engage the public in national dialogue, consultation, and reforms that will impact the life, impact the daily lives of Tunisian. We must put an end to dividing the people. Kais Saied and his supporters are on the right path, and the rest are traitors, agents, and conspirators. He eliminates any form of opposition. He does not believe in dialogue. He despises others. All his speeches spread the hate. His whole record is to put dozens of people who criticizes him in prison. Kais Saied think that his action were legal and necessary to save Tunisia from chaos. He has called his critics, criminals, traitors, terrorists, and urged authorities to take action against them. Kais Saied is more and more isolated now, and opposition is more and more united. That's what scares him now, I think. You see, mainly support for the migrants has thus morphed into support for a restoration of democracy and the formation of a barricade against the rising tide of authoritarianism following the dissolution of parliament and municipal councils. I don't know if you saw that UGTT is the country's largest and most powerful trade union. Has staged protests by thousands of members in 8 cities around the countries and accused Kais Saied of trampling on a basic human rights. A political coalition, the National Salvation Front, has also defied orders and protested the arrest of scores of opposition figures, demanding the president step down. Opponents say that the situation in Tunisia is becoming increasingly unstable as inflation and the high cost of living continue to bite, and the country fracture along political, social, and regional lines. But for now, there are no signs that Said is prepared to back down on his harsh policy prescription, despite the international outcry. One Tunisian dryly tweeted, Robocook has turned to Terminator now. That's pity, really.
Thank you so much, Dr. Siham, for this comprehensive picture that you gave us about the political repression that is now taking place in Tunisia and the grave human rights violations, as well as the steps that you propose to overcome these violations and repression that is taking place. We will be now moving to our next speaker, Emiliano Abramo, who's a member of Asylum Applications Committee in Catania, Italy. Emiliano will be speaking in Italian, and I will be reading the English translation after he speaks. Emiliano, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon. I prefer to speak Italian language because I have my religion is very important what I want to say today. So now I start in Italian language. Gli obitori di Sfax straboccano di cadaveri di migranti subsahariani affogati in mare. L'allarme lanciato dal direttore della sanità regionale Hatem Sherif è rimbalzato in tutte le agenzie di stampa del Mediterraneo. Infatti si poteva ascoltare in viva voce su Radio Mosaic anche in Sicilia, in città come Trapani, Mazzara del Vallo, Pantelleria e Lampedusa, dove il segnare e la musica di questa emittente arrivano forti e chiare. Questa voce è giunta. La Tunisia è proprio qui, a 100 chilometri di mare dalla Sicilia dove io vivo, 14 ore di traghetto, 1 ora di aereo. E Tunisia è casa per migliaia di italiani e i legami di vicinato che uniscono il nostro sud con le loro coste a nord oramai si datano in millenni di storia. L'immagine dei poveri corpi senza nome né diritti, nemmeno da morti, accatastati dentro gli stanzoni ospedalieri del complesso di medicina legale dell'ospedale universitario Habib Bourguiba non può non prendere la gola. E se sei lì, lo fa anche fisicamente. Un obitorio pensato per 35 salme, quando ne ha 100, e e i deodoranti chirurgici non riescono a contenere. Dall'inizio dell'anno, secondo l'organizzazione numero indefinito di dispersi. La Tunisia non è ancora la Libia, ma non è più democrazia, dice l'European Council on the Foreign Relations, riferendosi alla svolta autoritaria impressa dal presidente Sayed, che ha usato il potere ottenuto a furor di popolo, sfiancato dall'economia stagnante e infuriato con la casta. Con le elezioni di 2 anni fa sciogliere tutto, dal Parlamento alla Corte Suprema, e incarcerare un bel po' di oppositori politici e giornalisti. A metà febbraio, ad esempio, è stato arrestato Noureddin Boutar, noto giornalista e direttore generale di Moisic FM, la radio privata più importante del paese, ascoltatissima soprattutto tra i giovani. Ma torniamo alla condizione dei profughi e come sono trattati. Dal sud, a Zarzis, tempo fa arrivò la notizia che le autorità ci hanno provato a far sparire 18 cadaveri di un naufragio, seppellendoli alla meglio per non dover spiegare niente ai familiari. Ma la popolazione si è ribellata, con scontri e barricate durante giorni. Anche a Sfax, dove lavorano medici e ricercatori dentro quel dipartimento di medicina legale, non è così semplice liberarsi dei corpi che il mare ha restituito, anche se quelle erano vite di subsahariani, donne, uomini e bambini profughi, non di tunisini con famiglie che li reclamano, erano soli. Tragicamente, anche in Italia conosciamo la questione, dove è sempre il mare che restituisce i corpi abbaiandoli sulle spiagge, come è avvenuto ad esempio di recente a Cutro nel sud Italia. Il mare a volte aiuta le autorità inghiottendo o portando lontano dagli occhi, a seconda delle correnti, i frammenti di vita per sempre dispersi. Il mare è il cimitero giusto, nessuna lapide segnala che lì, in quel punto, è avvenuto un naufragio. In mare anche gli speronamenti dei barchini ad opera delle motovedette della Guardia Nazionale tunisina non lasciano tracce. Se non c'è qualcuno che li filma con il telefonino e riesce poi a rimanere vivo, o dall'alto di un aereo civile, perché gli aerei militari o dell'agenzia Frontex vedono tutto, ma non parlano, coperti dal segreto militare. In mare non restano che relitti, ma quei barchini, si sa, spesso sono delle bare galleggianti già in partenza. Ma per fortuna i sopravvissuti ci sono, nonostante i quasi 600 morti del 2022. Proprio grazie alle loro foto, video e testimonianze sulla brutalità che la Guardia tunisina esercita, e la Guardia tunisina fa capo al Ministero degli Interni, utilizza nel catturare e affondare o deportare i migranti in mare, possiamo sperare nella giustizia. Tutto questo materiale, che sappiamo fortunatamente già essere in possesso della Corte europea e delle Nazioni Unite. A dicembre dello scorso anno, un vasto raggruppamento di organizzazioni della società civile tunisina, italiana ed europea ha denunciato tutto questo in un documento dal titolo "I naufragi provocati consapevolmente al largo della Tunisia devono cessare". La Guardia Nazionale usa vecchie motovedette italiane e qui rispunta il sistema Libia, sistemati dai soliti cantieri Vittoria di Adria in provincia di Rovigo, in Italia. È una storia di successo dell'imprenditoria italiana, di quella media impresa a conduzione familiare, questa dei cantieri Vittoria. Se non ci fosse da prepararne mezzi per la cattura e deportazione nel Mediterraneo dei profughi, forse avrebbero già chiuso. E invece, ecco l'ingegno italico. Nel dicembre 2020 l'appalto per la manutenzione e rimessa in efficienza di 6 motovedette, già donate dall'Italia alla Tunisia nel 2014, se lo aggiudica proprio questo cantiere Vittoria, anche perché è l'unico concorrente, 6,5 milioni di euro a sostegno della nostra economia. Ma il Vittoria è davvero fortunato, oltre che operoso. È lo stesso che si era beccato l'appalto nel 2014 per la costruzione di ben 12 motovedette per la Guardia Tunisina, incassando altri 16 milioni. Naturalmente, anche in questi acquisti delle motovedette vengono effettuati con fondi che provengono dalle risorse destinate allo sviluppo della Tunisia. Ma prima degli ospedali, delle scuole, delle case, del grano che con la guerra in Ucraina manca, è ovvio che bisogna pensare a come addestrarli a fermare con ogni mezzo gli esseri umani in mare o in terra, nei lager, esattamente come in Libia. In conclusione, mi sembra di buon senso la dichiarazione del commissario europeo italiano Paolo Gentiloni, che dice: stabilizzare l'economia della Tunisia è una premessa anche per gestire insieme il tema dei flussi migratori. Non possiamo nasconderci dal fatto che molti flussi dall'Africa subsahariana si sono concentrati in Tunisia. E poi prosegue, a margine del workshop Ambrosetti: la Tunisia ha bisogno di aiuti per gestire in modo umanitario la presenza di queste persone, per favorire, sottolinea il commissario Gentiloni, i rimpatri volontari quando ce ne siano le condizioni e per gestire i movimenti verso l'Unione Europea, sapendo che bisogna lavorare sempre di più per migrazioni irregolari di cui la nostra economia ha tra l'altro bisogno, e sempre meno invece per incoraggiare i movimenti irregolari che mettono a rischio la vita delle persone, conclude Gentiloni. E concludo anch'io. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abramo. I will now briefly read the English translation of some of the points that were raised by Mr. Abramo. So Mr. Abramo said that Sfax's morgues are filled with the bodies of sub-Saharan migrants who drowned at sea. The alarm raised by the Director of Regional Health, Hatem Sharif, spread in all press agencies of the Mediterranean, even on the radio Mosaic FM. Tunisia is here, 800 kilometers by sea, 14 hours by ferry from Palermo, 2 hours by plane. Tunisia is home to thousands of Italians, and the neighborhood ties between us date back thousands of years. Many nameless and rightless bodies are piled up inside the large hospital rooms of the forensic medicine complex of the Habib Bourguiba University Hospital. A morgue designed for 35 corpses is filled with 100. Since the beginning of the year, according to the International Organization for Migration, 450 people have died in the Tunisian Sea. The number of missing remains unknown. Tunisia is not Libya, but it is no longer a democracy, says the European Council on Foreign Relations, referring to the authoritarian turnaround made by President Said, who used the power obtained by the people through elections 2 years ago to dissolve everything from parliament to the Supreme Court and to jail political opponents and journalists. In mid-February, for example, Noureddin Boutar, a well-known journalist and general manager of Mosaic FM, the most important private radio station in the country, listened to especially among young people, was arrested. But let's go back to the condition of refugees and how they are treated. From the south, in Zarzeks, news arrived some time ago that the authorities had tried to make 18 corpses from a shipwreck disappear by burying them so they won't have to explain anything to their families. But the population rebelled with clashes and barricades that lasted for days. Even in Sfax, where there are doctors and researchers in the forensic medicine, it still is not so simple to get rid of the bodies that the sea has returned, even if those were lives of sub-Saharan refugee women, men, and children, not of Tunisian families who claim them. Tragically, even in Italy, it is always the sea that returns the bodies to the shores, as happened recently in Cottaro, in southern Italy. The sea sometimes helps the authorities by swallowing up or taking the bodies far away, depending on the currents. The sea is their true cemetery. No stone indicates a place of a shipwreck. At sea, even the ramming of the small boats by the patrol boats of the Tunisian National Guard leave no traces. If there isn't someone who films with them a mobile phone and then manages to stay alive, or from a civil plane, because the military sees everything, but they stay silent. But we know these small boats are often floating coffins. Luckily, there are survivors despite the death of 600 in 2022. Thanks to their photos, videos, and testimonies on the brutality of the Tunisian Guard of the Ministry of the Interior, which uses force in capturing and drowning or deporting migrants in sea, we can still hope for justice. The current presidential campaign is worrying as it is marked by racism, pushing many Africans to leave for Europe precisely on small boats, not equipped to face the perils of the Mediterranean Sea. This, together with the investments for the purchase of Italian patrol boats for sea control, is another element in transforming Tunisia into a new Libya. Thank you so much again, Mr. Abramo. I also want to actually now pose a question to Dr. Nabil Khouri about the link between the racist rhetoric now used by the Tunisian state, particularly by President Qais Said, to the deteriorating economic situation in there as well, because you mentioned how now the economy in Tunisia is falling, and how that might be linked to the anti-immigration rhetoric deployed by the state now, if you have any comment on that.
I'm not sure I caught the first part of your question, the relationship between
the anti-migrant rhetoric or discourse now deployed by the state, and how that might be linked to the deteriorating economic situation in Tunisia. Are there like promises of funds by European states if Tunisia controls the borders of Europe and prevents migrants from reaching there? Is there any coordination between Europe and Tunisian state on the situation of migrants on this?
Well, unfortunately, the issue of illegal migration is often used, not just in Tunisia, but everywhere, including here in the US, is used for political purposes. And the Middle East and countries that are suffering from the weight of migrants from other countries because they have to be supported, they pose a burden on services in the country. That is used as an excuse to say we're not doing well economically because of all these migrants who come in. This is an excuse. It is also another abuse of human rights because you cannot be really taking care of the human rights of your own people if you're abusing the human rights of migrants. They are entitled under international law to every consideration and every assistance. Now, is there coordination? I'm not sure that there is, and I'm afraid that several European countries working out of the fear of being flooded even more with international migrants, with illegal migration, would focus on security measures. So if they give money or if they do coordination, it is to further enforce closed borders, which is not really the solution. I think a country, again, I compare with Lebanon, another country that suffers from illegal migration and migrants living in the country and imposing burdens on the economy, is that the solution is to help the economy so it can better bear up under the pressure, and also to solve the problems of where these migrants are being generated, so that people don't leave their countries just for fun. They leave because they have to. They leave because of wars, economic problems, sometimes famine in the countries of their origin. And those are the issues that should be tackled rather than simply imposing more sanctions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nabil, for your response. We will now be moving to Aziz Akrami, who's the son of the detained Judge Bashir Akrami, now held in Tunisian prisons. Aziz, are you here?
Yeah, I'm listening to you. Is my voice clear?
Yeah, it is. Thank you, Aziz, for being here. Can you tell us about what happened to your father and the human rights violation that he's experiencing now?
First of all, my name is Mohammed Aziz Akrami. I'm the son of Judge Bashir Akrami, who's currently imprisoned by the Tunisian regime. To understand what's happening with my father is to understand what has the president been doing for the last couple of years. Kais Saied needed to control every aspect of Tunisian politics and Tunisian power. And in order to do that, he needed to control the judiciary. He understood that if left unchecked, the judiciary could cause problems for him. And he could not really do what he's doing today with the political arrests and targeting of opponents if the judiciary was independent. So the first step was to fire the previous judicial council and appoint a puppet council in its place. And this puppet council will serve as the start of the dismantling of the judiciary independence in Tunisia. At first, he simply, my father has served 34 years as a judge in Tunisia, and at the time in 2021, he was the general prosecutor of court of Tunis, and he was the head of the anti-terrorism pole. And what he did using this puppet judicial council was to change his position illegally into another position under the guise of a promotion. My father used the only weapon he knew, which was the law, and he decided to appeal that with the administrative court, and he eventually won his case. But now we start getting into the pattern of my father using the law and winning his cases at the administrative court, but the political pressure in Tunisia preventing him from going back to work. So at first, police officers simply blocked him from going back into his office. And then on the 13th of July, 2021, the Judicial Council decided to suspend him under no real case against him. My father again went into the administrative court and again won the case. But the same day he won his case, in order to be reinstated as a judge, the president decided to fire 57 judges along with my father. Let me say that again. The president of Tunisia decided to fire 57 judges by presidential decree. Any real look at democracy or study of democracy would tell you that this is a grave infraction, and this whole sentence seems completely unreal to anyone who hears it. The president decided to fire 57 judges, but that's exactly what happened in Tunisia on the 1st of June 2022. After this, the chapter of torment for my father did not end. He kept fighting in the administrative court, which caused problems for the president. So he then decided to put him under house arrest on the 29th of July, 2021, up until the end of September. This was completely illegal. Again, the president has no power to put a judge under house arrest. This is something that judges do. But again, it was a presidential decree. We now see the president trying to grab on as much power as possible, and the political landscape at Tunisia at the time was simply silent. It was insane to see the amount of cowardice that was going on in the political landscape, they used the strategy of wait and see, which eventually will come back to really hurt them. To take you back to present day, on the 12th of February, 12th of February of this year, a group of approximately 30 police officers dressed in civilian clothing forcefully entered our home and proceeded to search and toss every room. During this process, which was brutal, they insulted my father, confiscated various possessions, including his phone, my sister's laptop, many other possessions, and then took my father away in an unmarked car without even addressing him and telling him what was going on. Once in custody, my father was taken to the anti-terrorism agency, the Pol, which he was once a director of, and he was subjected to torture and interrogated for, he was subjected to torture and he was tied to a chair for 26 hours, overnight in a dark room in a chair. The police that was responsible for this arrest and torture was the same police unit that my father once prosecuted for torture and fabrication of facts. This same police unit was now in charge of his arrest and his treatment. Despite this, my father did not submit and decided to initiate a waterless hunger strike. The arrest was clearly politically motivated, and as my father was a constant advocate for the independence of the judiciary, he has faced constant pressure and smear campaigns from the media. Initially, the allegation against my father were so baseless that the judge assigned to this case dismissed it in only 5 days. However, this same judge was later punished for this decision. Rather than releasing my father, police, acting on orders from political elite or unknown parties, instead forcibly took him into a mental institution where he was held under false pretenses without even giving him knowledge of his release. At the hospital, numerous human rights violations took place, from illegally threatening doctors to encircling the hospital and preventing anyone from entering or leaving during the first few days. We also at this time heard rumors of my father attempting suicide, and the president himself went on TV and claimed that there was a judge pretending to be crazy, which was absolutely insane to anyone who knew him. It was clear that they were preparing some foundation to get rid of him once and for all. We intensified the media pressure and confirmed that my father was perfectly healthy. Eventually, after this media pressure, we were granted access to see him, and it was heartbreaking to witness the condition and complete blackout of information inflicted on him. My father didn't even know he was released, wasn't even aware of what was going on, what were the charges against him, and he was in physical strain due to the hunger strike. All of this was filmed on videos with him saying statements about the torture, and you could see his mental and physical health at the time. He insisted that he was mentally fit, and this was a simple political conspiracy against him. He argued that it was ridiculous to release someone from one crime only to charge him with another crime. This judge for 30 years work extensively and also order these.
I think Muhammad Aziz might be experiencing some issues with the sound.
It's closed, yeah.
I think I was just cut off for a second there. I will continue.
Yeah, actually, the last part wasn't clear at all because the voice kept.
All right. Basically, they were putting him in the hospital in order to prepare a next case against him, illegally keeping him at the hospital, not letting him go home, even though he was officially released by the judge. And then that's exactly what happened. The next case was ready, and he was taken to again to the anti-terrorist Pol, where he was being held for 6-7 days. And then a new judge, which was the same judge who arrested over political opponents of the president, Judge Samir Zouebi, issued an arrest warrant against him. And to this day, my father sits in prison in Mornageya based on this arrest warrant. And this new case was actually about the assassination of Shukri Belaid in 2013, which this particular case was already brought up in 2018 and was already looked at and dismissed by the court. So they had no right to bring back a new case and reopen it, but this was just simply pure fabrications, and they knew that. Today, my father sits in prison and in completely bad circumstances, and this injustice continues to this day. If anyone has any questions about anything that was unclear, or please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muhammad Aziz, for sharing with us what's happening now to your father and the grave injustice that he's experiencing now, which many also other political critics, judges and journalists are experiencing as well. We hope that freedom and justice will happen soon to your father.
Thank you.
And for everyone who has questions, we will allocate the last part of the discussion for any questions that anyone has for our speakers. We will be now moving to our next speaker, Consultant Jean Claude, who's an expert at international and political relations. He will be speaking in French, but the English translation will appear on the screen.
Bonjour, donc pour parler effectivement de la situation aujourd'hui en Tunisie, je crois que c'est une situation inédite dans toute l'histoire tunisienne. C'est vrai qu'à l'époque de Ben Ali, la Tunisie a connu un régime autoritaire, un régime effectivement qui réprimait les opposants, les défenseurs des droits de l'homme. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes effectivement, encore une fois, avec Kais Saïed dans un régime de type autoritaire. Mais attention, ce n'est pas un retour en arrière, ce n'est pas un retour au régime de Ben Ali. C'est un autoritarisme qui est différent de celui de Ben Ali pour plusieurs raisons. Première raison, c'est un régime autoritaire, mais que l'on peut le qualifier d'un autoritarisme identitaire. Car le président Kais Saïed a un très fort discours idéologique sur, entre guillemets, la pureté de l'identité tunisienne et très virulent contre tout ce qui vient de l'étranger. Je dirais que son régime nourrit ce qu'on pourrait appeler une rhétorique conspirationniste, complotiste, considérant que les malheurs de la Tunisie sont dus à l'intervention de l'étranger. Ce qui explique que son régime est très virulent à l'égard des opposants démocrates, qu'il accuse justement d'être des espions au service de l'étranger. Il est très virulent à l'égard des organisations des droits de l'homme, des organisations féministes, qu'il associe à des bras armés ou des espions au service de réseaux étrangers. Il est très virulent également à l'égard des étrangers qui peuvent vivre en Tunisie. On l'a vu ces dernières semaines, le discours très anti-africain contre les migrants africains, voire même contre les Noirs tunisiens, où le chef de l'État, Kais Saïed, a développé un véritable racisme. On peut même dire un racisme inédit, violent, virulent, qu'on n'avait jamais connu dans toute l'histoire tunisienne. Donc, premier élément à souligner, c'est que l'autoritarisme de Kais Saïed, c'est un autoritarisme nouveau qui, aujourd'hui, comporte une très forte dimension identitaire et idéologique. Deuxième caractéristique qui le différencie de l'autoritarisme qu'a connu la Tunisie sous Ben Ali, c'est un autoritarisme qui est violemment antidémocratique. Bien sûr, Ben Ali n'était pas un démocrate, c'était un dictateur. Mais on peut dire qu'il avait un discours plutôt favorable aux institutions démocratiques, aux droits de l'homme et aux libertés. Aujourd'hui, Kais Saïed est direct. Il considère que la démocratie parlementaire n'est pas faite pour la Tunisie. Il veut construire ce qu'il appelle une démocratie authentiquement tunisienne, 100% tunisienne. Et dans ce projet idéologique, profondément idéologique, Kais Saïed, il veut tout simplement casser tout ce qui peut être les organes de représentation, les ONG, les associations, les partis politiques, mais aussi le Parlement. Et d'ailleurs, dans la nouvelle constitution écrite par Kais Saïed et adoptée seulement par 10% des Tunisiens, le Parlement, les députés n'ont aucun pouvoir. Tout le pouvoir vient à Kais Saïed. Autre caractéristique, c'est un président qui gouverne seul. Et c'est un autoritarisme que l'on pourrait qualifier de solitaire. Certes, Ben Ali, avant 2011, était un dictateur. Certes, la majorité du pouvoir exécutif, du pouvoir législatif judiciaire était concentrée entre les mains de Ben Ali. Mais au moins, à l'époque de Ben Ali, il y avait aussi des ministres, des hauts fonctionnaires qui contribuaient à définir les politiques du pays. Or, aujourd'hui, Kais Saïed crée un nouvel autoritarisme où il gouverne seul, c'est-à-dire qu'il ne tient pas compte ni de l'avis et des conseils des ministres, ni de l'avis du Premier ministre, ni de l'avis des hauts fonctionnaires. Donc, de ce point de vue-là, c'est un pouvoir solitaire, c'est un autoritarisme hyper présentialisé qui concentre la totalité des pouvoirs, des pouvoirs qui peuvent exister en Tunisie, qu'ils soient judiciaires, politiques ou parlementaires. Oui, effectivement, on a raison d'être très inquiet pour l'évolution politique, sociale et économique de la Tunisie. C'est la première fois que la Tunisie, et ça c'est une quatrième caractéristique de Kais Saïed, c'est une sorte de diplomatie complètement identitaire qui remet en cause toutes les alliances de la Tunisie avec l'Europe, avec l'Afrique et une partie du monde arabe pour développer une sorte de diplomatie populiste. D'ailleurs, Kais Saïed ne cache pas qu'aujourd'hui, il veut remettre en cause les relations diplomatiques traditionnelles de la Tunisie, celles qui avaient été bâties pendant 50 ans et qu'on pouvait considérer la Tunisie comme un pays du juste milieu diplomatique entre l'Afrique et le monde arabe, entre le monde arabe et l'Europe, un juste milieu diplomatique qui contribuait à faire des démédiations entre les différents pays du Maghreb. Or, tout cela, Kais Saïed l'a cassé. Il fait une diplomatie solitaire, une diplomatie qui est en train véritablement d'isoler la Tunisie sur le plan international. Donc oui, on peut être inquiet, on peut être pessimiste pour l'avenir de la Tunisie, on peut être pessimiste parce qu'effectivement, on retrouve de plus en plus des logiques répressives, on retrouve de plus en plus une logique de pouvoir qui consiste effectivement à s'en prendre aux partis politiques, à s'en prendre aux défenseurs des droits de l'homme, à s'en prendre finalement à tout ce qui constitue en Tunisie des voix indépendantes. Aujourd'hui, finalement, ceux-là qui portent une voix indépendante, qu'elle soit libérale, qu'elle soit de gauche, qu'elle soit islamiste, qu'elle soit même féministe, toutes ces voix aujourd'hui sont en train d'être réprimées en Tunisie. Et en tant que spécialiste de la Tunisie, en tant que sociologue, en tant que politologue, oui, c'est une situation totalement inédite qui fait que la Tunisie est plongée dans une crise profonde, une crise sociale, une crise économique et une crise politique. Et il faut donc alerter la communauté internationale, la communauté des pays arabes, la communauté, je dirais, de tous les démocrates dans le monde sur effectivement cette dérive totalement autoritaire, personnelle et hyper présidentialiste du régime tunisien.
Thank you very much, Vincent Gissier, a French sociologist and political scientist. I apologize for saying another name, actually, when introducing you. I got the names mixed up. But thank you so much for your intervention and comment on the political repression, which is unprecedented in Tunisia, and how Tunisia is losing its role as a mediating power between Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, and the increasing political and economic repression taking place now. We have our last speaker for this webinar, Kauthar Farajani, who's the daughter of the political detainee Said Farajani. Kauthar, please, the floor is yours.
No, thank you for having me. I'm just going to read something I wrote earlier, initially. My father is Said Farajani. He's been languishing in a Tunisian prison for the last 35 days. for the second time in his life under yet another Tunisian dictator. The first time I was 3 years old, I watched police storm our home and hold my dad down on the kitchen floor. This was 1987 under the Ben Ali regime. My father was severely tortured using methods that are illegal under international law. His back was broken and he was unable to walk. At times, his torture was so severe, he ended up in a coma for 5 days. Unfortunately, after all the gains, albeit imperfect, of the Tunisian revolution, at 68, my father is yet again paying the price for his commitment to human rights and his participation in democracy. We've known since 25th of July 2021 that my father will most likely be targeted in a crackdown. He was also named in a leaked document as part of a list of names to place on house arrest after Qais's coup. Leading up to his arrest, my father was followed by police everywhere he went, including to his brother's funeral in Qayrawaan, where my father only learnt of his death after a day's interrogation. On Monday, the 20th of February, my father was summoned for questioning on the Instalingo conspiracy as a witness. Prior to this, since the coup, he was asked to come in a few times for questioning on various matters. On Monday, the 27th of February, my father was summoned again and interrogated. My parents' home was raided by police, yet despite finding no evidence, he was detained and a hearing was set in Sousse 2 days later on the 1st of March. The prosecution were convinced of my father's answers and we were hopeful that he would be let go. However, due to pressure from Qais Said, they issued a prison warrant without charge until they find evidence. In most countries, including the Tunisia before the coup, this is not lawful. My father is yet to be charged, no evidence has been found, and no hearing has been set. The judge during my father's case was unable to look my father in the eye while issuing his imprisonment. This has been a common ethical dilemma amongst the Tunisian judiciary since the crackdown began after Qais's coup, where judges are visibly nervous, embarrassed, and at times even crying when issuing out unlawful detentions. Some have resorted to taking sick leave in order to avoid issuing false imprisonments due to the ultimatum Qais gave the judiciary of either detaining those he wished imprisoned or be considered as co-conspirators. As my father told his lawyer, we have shifted from the independence of the judiciary to the use and abuse of the judiciary. My father immediately went on a nil-by-mouth hunger strike. For him, this was the only way he could protest the sham hearings he and his fellow political prisoners were subjected to. The conditions in which my father is being held are concerning. He was placed in an overcrowded cell with around 120 inmates, in a cell with a capacity of 60, and his health began to deteriorate. He was sent to the hospital a few times, where he once lost consciousness while doctors tried to retrieve his blood without uncuffing him. This was under police orders. My father recently stopped his hunger strike to prepare for Ramadan. We have recently heard that my father isn't told what time he can begin his fast or end it. At times, he's told one, but not the other, and he's not told his prayer times either. He's also sharing a cell with mentally ill and violent inmates that should not be in general population. One is self-harming, one was seen eating his flesh and even cutting flesh from his thigh and putting it in a sandwich, and one gouged the eye of another inmate. We also know they placed a camera in his cell. He's yet to be visited by any NGO to check on his prison conditions, though I have reached out. In my father's own words, the case against him is nothing but an attempt to whitewash and normalize the coup and take revenge against its opponents, and that it is based on accusations by individuals who have had their honesty and integrity severely called into question. My father has spent most of his life fighting dictatorship and oppression and advocating for human rights, whether in Tunisia or as a community activist during his 21 years of exile in the UK. As a democratically elected MP and prominent figure in Tunisian politics, my father has played an instrumental role in promoting democracy and human rights in Tunisia since 2011, after the Arab Spring. His imprisonment, along with other political prisoners, is a blatant attempt to suppress opposition voices and peaceful dissent. My father has always believed in democracy and the rule of law, in defending the rights of those who are oppressed, and sends a clear message. I'll speak loudly from inside and outside Tunisia with those who share with me the belief in the values of freedom, democracy, and human rights. I also want to mention that my family have been working with a barrister here in the UK and on behalf of prisoners and the family of the protester that was killed during an anti-coup protest, Rida Bouzien. We have called for sanctions. Right now it's starting in the UK, sanctions against Qais Said, an interior minister, well, two of the interior ministers, the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Defense. I also want to just reference something that Dr. Ellie said about the situation in Tunisia is not unique in the Arab world, but I would say it is a bit unique because Tunisia, what makes it uniquely tragic is that Tunisia has tasted freedoms and democracy in the last 10 years. This isn't simply a continuation of authoritarianism. This is going back to before, and that I think that is uniquely tragic, and I think that makes it very concerning, and we do need the international community to stop supporting Qais's actions. In particular, Italy and France have been very disappointing. In the case of Italy, they haven't just been supporting Qais, but they've been lobbying others to financially support his vision. And I would say they have probably been particularly upsetting, given the comments they've said with regards to Qais's crackdown. They seem to be supporting it. They seem to be enthusiastic of Ennahda's repression and using Islamophobic rhetoric in order to promote Qais's crackdown. I think another thing with regards to the international community, particularly Europe, and particularly France and Italy, and now even in the UK, the migrant crisis, so-called migrant crisis, and their anti-migrant policies are clearly informing their position when it comes to supporting Qais and his crackdown, especially his recent racist scapegoating of Black migrants. And I think that's rather unfortunate at the moment. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kauthar, for your testimony about what's happening to your father, Sayed Firjani, and all the other detainees also now, the political detainees in Tunisia. The Arab organization will give your father's case and all the other detainees a great attention and prioritize it as an urgent matter and a legal and a humanitarian case that needs to be solved. And all human rights organizations should be working towards finding a just solution and free all the political prisoners now held in the regime's prisons. And thank you so much again, Kauthar, for everything that you mentioned. And we hope freedom and justice to your father will happen very soon. We are now able to receive questions from the journalists or anyone who is attending the webinar. So if you have any questions, you can either post it in the chat box, or if you would like to say it yourself using the mic option, that can also that will also be okay. You can also use the raise hand button if you would like to speak, but we can also receive questions on the chat box. Okay, so it seems that we don't have any questions so far. Okay, then we can close the session now, and I would like to thank all the speakers who were with us today for their time and for their intervention and testimonies that they shared with us today. It's very worrying what's happening now in Tunisia, And we need to be highlighting all the human rights violations taking place, especially in regards to migrants as well as to political prisoners who are not only being tortured, but they are experiencing grave human rights violations. And we hope that international human rights organizations can prioritize their cases and to press the government for the release, for their immediate release. And we at the Arab Organization for Human Rights, thank you all for being here today, and hopefully we will see you for our next